Welcome to Championship Week, everybody. For most of you out there, it is your fantasy football championship week. I'm assuming since you're watching this video, you have a couple championship matchups, or maybe just one matchup coming up that you're super excited for. So here today, I'm delivering matchups that I love, hate, or just want to talk about for fantasy football to help you set those lines and help you win those fantasy football championships. Before I get in this video, I'd appreciate if you're subscribed to this YouTube channel and click that notification bell so you'll be notified every single time a new video does drop on this YouTube channel. The fantasy football season is coming to a close, but that doesn't mean you can't stick around. There's plenty of off-season content. There's plenty of playoff content to come through on the 4-4 Football YouTube channel. Same thing goes for the website. There's plenty of content on that website. And when going to a plan on the plans page, 44.com/plans, if you want a discount, use the code YouTube when signing up for a plan of premium bonus content. Again, use the code YouTube for 25% off your plan. Doesn't matter what plan you choose, use the code YouTube for 25% off. So let's get right in this video. Remember, this is matchups I love, hate, or just want to talk about in fantasy football for this week. The first one is going to be a quarterback that I like to start this week. I'm going to be talking about Brock Purdy. Obviously, last week wasn't too hot. He threw 4 interceptions, and he didn't eclipse 5 fantasy points in most leagues. If you had him in your semifinals matchup and you made it through, props to you. But this week, I think he's going to have a better game. Obviously, the San Francisco 49ers had a tough night against the Baltimore Ravens. They lost to a tough AFC competitor, and I think they're going to be coming out for blood this week. And there is no better team to do that than against the Washington Commanders. I mean, the Commanders have arguably the worst secondary in the entire National Football League. They allow the most fantasy points to fantasy quarterbacks and the second most fantasy points to fantasy wide receivers, and are just below average in terms of fantasy points allowed to tight ends. Adding on to that, Brock Purdy's interceptions last week, there were 4 of them. 3 of them were pretty unlucky. They were tip passes that ended up in the Baltimore Ravens secondary's hands. So I'm not too worried about that nonsense going on this week. I think Brock Purdy's going to have a fantastic day. I think this entire San Francisco offense is going to eat this week. So if you have any San Francisco 49ers on your roster, you know those stud 5, you know what I'm talking about: McCaffrey, Debo, Ayuk, Kittle, and Purdy. If you have any of those 5 guys, they should be in your fantasy lineups, and you should be pretty excited. So looking forward to the tight end position, there's a streaming tight end that I really like this week. Look at Gerald Everett. Gerald Everett is a fantastic option. I mean, over the last 3 weeks, he's seen 8 targets in each game. Since Easton Stick has taken over, he's been a very relevant fantasy tight end, not doing stud numbers, but the targets are there. And this week against a matchup with the Denver Broncos, who allow almost the most touchdowns of fantasy tight ends this year, and also allow the most fantasy points to tight ends this year. They are a disaster when you look at tight end defense, and it's clear that they've given up this season. They just benched Russell Wilson for Jarrett Stidham, so the team has clearly given up. So it's Gerald Everett's going to have a fantastic day. So looking at a bench, someone I don't really like this week, I'm talking about Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley, someone I'm quite concerned about this week. Over the last handful of weeks, or last 4 to 5 weeks, he's seen plenty of volume. He's seen 9 targets in each of his last 4 games or more. And the only week he actually did something really relevant for fantasy was just this past week against Tampa Bay secondary, who allowed the 2nd most receiving yards to wide receivers and the 4th most receiving yards to wide receivers. This week, he gets a matchup with the Carolina Panthers, who are much tougher against the pass than people like to give them credit for. They're also really bad against the run. So Travis Etienne and company are going to have a really good day. And since Trevor Lawrence is injured, he's dealing with a couple injuries right now. I don't think it'd be surprising if the Jaguars said, hey, we can run the ball all day against this team. Let's do it. Let's try to preserve Trevor Lawrence. And they just don't really let Trevor Lawrence throw the ball much. And as a result, that would leave Calvin Ridley with a limited target share in the offense. This feels like a bad risk to take for Calvin Ridley. So the next player we want to talk about is stay away from the Colts. So not really a player, but an offense. I'm staying away from the Colts this week if I can. Michael Pittman and Jonathan Taylor, as long as they're both healthy and active, you can start them. You can, but I'd be quite nervous about it. I mean, Jonathan Taylor, we know he's an all-pro talent. You can start Jonathan Taylor. Michael Pittman, he's been on fire this year. He's been really great for fantasy football. So as long as he's healthy, you can start him. I mean, the rest of the offense is a complete no. Gardner Minshew, no. Zach Moss, no. The rest of the receiving core, absolutely not. They get the Raiders this week, and the Raiders defense, while most people, look at them and say, oh, they're not a bad defense, but they're not great. No, they've been playing like one of the best defenses in the entire league over the last couple of weeks. They've been shut down at every single level. If you're looking for a streaming defense this week, they're one of them. They're a great one. They've been picked up in tons of leagues because they've just been just killing opposing offense over the last few weeks and doing great for fantasy. But if they're still somehow on your waiver wire, you better get them on your roster. They're absolutely worth playing this week. But yeah, I just want to stay away from the Colts with Pittman and JT. You can start them, but I'm worried about them. And then the rest of the guys are just absolutely not. So a start I really like this week at wide receiver moving forward here is Terry McLaurin. It's Sam Howell has officially been benched. Not many of us saw this coming, to be honest. He was almost leading the league in passing yards, but other than that, he was not really a great quarterback. I mean, watching him play, I thought he looked fine. I thought he looked good, but I didn't think he looked anything special. This week we got Jacoby Brissett, and against a very on and off San Francisco secondary, he's going to be able to get the ball to Terry McLaurin. Over the last 2 weeks when he started, it's been clear that Terry McLaurin is his top tier favorite target. So I expect at least 9 to 10 targets for him, maybe even more. And against a San Francisco defense that I mentioned earlier is on and off, I'm expecting Terry McLaurin to have a really fun week. Then looking towards a tight end that I want to bench this week, this is a tight end that a lot of people are excited for, specifically for dynasty purposes. He's a young stud developing. But this week is a no. Dalton Kincaid. Over the last handful of weeks, it's been disastrous for Dalton Kincaid. Since Dawson Knox has returned, since the Buffalo Bills bye week, Dawson Knox has not had a game of 7.5 fantasy points, and he's had 2 games below 3 fantasy points over the last 3 weeks. It's just been disastrous. The targets haven't been there, the volume hasn't been there, and as a result, the fantasy points have not been there. Dawson Knox has made a clear impact on Dalton Kincaid's fantasy value. Before the bye week early this season, we were looking at Dalton Kincaid as a tight end one. He was playing fantastic football for specifically for fantasy, but over the last handful of weeks since Dawson Knox returned, it has made a huge impact. So if you are still starting Dalton Kincaid, get him out of your lineup this week. That's not worth it. And looking at my defensive streamers for this week, I'm talking about the Texans against the Titans. Ryan Tannehill is going to be starting over Will Levis this week, so that's going to be quite concerning when you look at the passing offense. And then they were able to shut down Derrick Henry a couple weeks ago. I feel like they're going to try to replicate what they did a couple weeks ago and just try to shut down Derrick Henry. And then as a result, Ryan Tannehill is going to be disastrous for fantasy. And looking at the next one, I like the Chargers. Now, when you hear that name, you're like, haven't their defense been terrible this year? Yes, their defense has not been great this year. When you look at fantasy points, they're about 20th. They're just not the best fantasy defense. They're not the best NFL defense. They've been dealing with injuries. But last week, they showed some fire, man. They really, really did. Even though they're pretty much eliminated from the playoffs, they showed a lot of fire last week. And this week, they get a Jared Stidham-led Broncos that's going to be a disaster on offense. We know their receiving core is already pretty questionable. Their running game with Javonte Williams and company hasn't been the best this year. Their offensive line isn't great. Russell Wilson was already not great, but Jared Stidham is probably not going to be much better. So if you're, looking for a streaming defense, you can have the Chargers as an option. And I think earlier, like I mentioned, you can stream the Raiders defense. The Raiders defense is definitely worth a stream if you can find them. All right, but that's going to be it for this video. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I greatly, greatly appreciate you. Good luck in your finals week. We'll see you next video I have for 4-4 football. I don't know exactly what the plan is for me for 4-4 football. I mean, I want to keep getting content here. I'm super, super excited. So we'll see what whatever video comes next.